So you guys have been chatting a bit in preparation for this, preparing for this.
Preparing? No, we've just been hanging out, man.
Becoming best buddies.
And Steve hates polar bears, and you hate humans.
Yeah,
That's what we're gonna do. This you could have been Epstein. It could have been it'd never have been Safedine. Right.
has he been on the show?
Safedine?
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
A couple of
Yeah,
times.
a couple of times, but we're not friends anymore. So
He's not friends with a lot of people.
Bitcoin's for enemies, though.
yeah, but
Oh,
this
yeah.
is a bit more than that. So, but I wish him the best, and I hope he has a good career with his writing and his education. And if he ever wants to apologize, I would be more than willing to have him back on the show and talk
His
to
new
him.
book is not good, though.
I mean, I still recommend his first book.
His first book?
Yeah,
Decent book.
Rip out the modern art piece and
Yeah.
get on with the rest of it. But it's a good. I think VJ's book's better, but I think they're both good entry books.
Still
Right.
the best is Andreas Antonopoulos' Mastering Bitcoin.
Yeah, I get
That is
about. I get
legendary.
past the kind of the index, and I get a bit lost.
One book that's actually superb. I'll shill it. Do you know Eric Voskill?
Yeah, love Eric.
Oh, you do? You
yeah.
know him?
Yeah,
Okay.
Eric's great.
He's been on the show.
Yeah, he has been on the show. I
Oh,
recorded with
okay.
him in LA,
That was
actually.
a long time ago.
I recorded
Yeah.
with him in Travis Kling's place in LA.
Maybe we need to get him back on.
And the same day I interviewed Mike Cernovich, I think it was.
He's super underrated.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Eric a lot.
When, you know he's good when even the hardcore Bitcoiners can't get along with him. He's pretty.
Well, John
He's
Carvalho,
controversial. Well, John Carvalho.
he's been like that this week. I like John.
Yeah, I'm on John's page with all that.
Yeah, what is the... Well, we could talk about that later because we got other stuff to talk about. I
Yeah.
want to know what that zero comp thing is about, understand a bit more. I mean, we've essentially been using that the whole time this week selling merch
Yeah,
because we do Lightning transactions, but we also do on-chain ones. We just take it, zero conf, done.
Yeah.
You're in. So I need to know more about that. But anyway, we're here to talk about the end of the world. Steve, it's great to get you on the show. We should get you on the show again and do an actual show
Sure.
outside of this discussion. But just for... Is that you?
It's all right.
Fuck's sake, Danny.
Every time.
He's got so casual since he's got fans. Do you know what happens now? We go to conferences and people are like, "Oh, hi, Pete, chat to me," and I'm like, "Say hello," and they're like, "Oh, is that Danny?" And they get all excited.
handsome man, British accent.
Fuck's
But I'm married as
Get
well,
paid for his
unfortunately.
boots. But Steve, introduce yourself to those listening, who you are, what you do, why you hate the Earth,
Why I hate the planet
why
and
you
I
hate
want
the
to kill
planet,
it.
why you want to kill polar
Yeah.
bears.
Well, yeah, Steve Barbour. I own Upstream Data. I guess I came on the scene in 2017. Oil and gas background, so I'm a mechanical engineer. Oil field was always since 2011. I entered the industry. Oil production basically is my specialty. So before Bitcoin mining, like starting Upstream Data, I was doing like pump systems, like optimization. So I got like a few, I was actually pretty successful with doing some tool design, and I licensed that to an oil producer. So I basically specialize in making oil. Like that's what I try to do. I help producers make more oil,
How do you mean make oil?
produce oil, pump more oil.
Get it out of the ground.
Yeah, like a general gist of, oil and gas production is you drill, you complete, you obviously explore first, there's geology and all that involved, but you drill, you complete, and you put it on production. So once it goes on production, that's like where guys like me, like I was hired to do that.
And what do
So
you mean
I-
by production? Like
Once
make
the
it
well's
usable?
pumping,
Oh, right.
yeah, and there's all kinds of different, technologies and pumping systems. I'm from Lloydminster. That's where my career started. So that's heavy oil. So it's like very viscous, very sandy. It's a different kind of production. It's not like your normal. Like when you
There's
think
things-
oil, you probably think pump jacks.
This is like
Yeah.
the tar sand.
tar sand. You're trying to trigger me. It's called the oil sands.
Yeah.
No, it's all good. Everyone calls it the tar sands, and it basically is like tar. The tar sands is more bituminous surface mining, where you're literally mining the oil off the surface because it's just the geology there. All the oil is on surface up in the tar sands.
Is that the like in Canada? That
Yeah, in Canada.
ecological disaster.
Yeah, it's not the only place in the world. You guys, it's not the
You're
only
the
place in
neutral
the world
moderator.
where that happens, but it's the biggest place, and it's like the reserves, like the amount of oil is unbelievable that's up there, right? So incredible amount of oil up there. It's all surface mined and then, processed. And but it's a very heavy bituminous oil. Normal conventional oil, when you're thinking pump jacks, that's like more, it's just lighter,
sweet
higher
crude.
API, lower density. That sweet, beautiful crude.
That sweet crude.
Why is oil different? Like, is it different composition based on the, I don't know, what is it? The
It's a,
fossils that.
yeah, okay, this would be a better question for a geologist.
All right,
I'm
we'll
just
do this
a-
another
I'm-
show, another
yeah.
time. But yeah, so you get the oil out of the ground.
Some of it has to do with depth. Like
Okay.
the lighter ends on oil will flash off at lower pressures, and they can escape over time. That's what I was learned. But
I am a geologist, but a marine geologist, and it's been a long time since I studied the hydrocarbon development.
Right. Okay.
you can jump in at any time. But like,
no. You go.
the background of oil is not really what I'm good at.
Yeah.
Like getting it out of the ground and helping people do it cheaper is what I'm good at.
Right. Okay.
Pumping systems is sort of how I started. And so, yeah, people in the space know me from like since around 2017, I started doing really vent gas mining. It's commonly talked about as flare gas mining. But we were really successful and have been successful on small vent gas applications. So vent gas is basically associated gas that, you open a can of Coke and you have in solution, the gas comes out of solution because it's
Depressurize
the bubble
it.
point. Yeah. You're depressurizing it and it foams out. Just like that's literally what happens down the oil well. It's like foaming out.
Right. Okay.
And anyway, you got to get rid of that, right? So in Canadian oil, where I specialize, because I was saying that it was heavy oil, it's sandy. Because it's sandy, you can't pump it down pipelines. You have to truck it from site, and you don't have pipelines in place. So what you end up getting is this associated gas from the well as they're pumping oil to surface to the tank. The excess gas gets vented to atmosphere.
Okay.
And actually, there was it's been known for a long time, but like there was just I think it was NASA, but some satellite imagery just found a bunch of methane clouds. I don't know if you saw that; it made the news.
Yeah.
But Lloydminster, like where I'm based, is one of the hotspots in Canada for sure.
Right.
And it has to do with the technology of how oil is produced there. And I just happen to live in a hotbed of it. And engineers in our company, outside the company, in the industry, we want to figure out how to use that energy instead of wasting it. And Bitcoin came along, and I think I sort of right time because I was learning about Bitcoin. I was transitioning from my oil position to this downhole pumping systems stuff I was doing. Learned about Bitcoin, and then figured out you can use this energy intensive ocean boiling technology to monetize.
No,
that
I'm
waste.
boiling the ocean.
Yeah, we're gonna boil the oceans together. So I'm gonna help you boil those oceans.
Okay. Just introduce yourself as well. I know you're on the show, Nate, a few weeks ago. But just for anyone who didn't see that show, who they should go back and watch it. But just introduction again, who you are and why you're here.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nathaniel Harmon. I am the co-founder and CEO of OceanBit. We are a OTEC company. OTEC, of course, is because everyone knows what OTEC is. It's ocean thermal energy conversion. It's a renewable energy. It's the fourth major baseload renewable energy source. Third or fourth, depending on if you count nuclear, and I do. So the fourth, you got hydro, you've got geo, you've got nuclear, and then OTEC is this fourth one that, we were talking about it. Even you with your entire, background had never heard of OTEC. We get inbound from PhDs with thermodynamic backgrounds, never heard of it. Renewable energy guys who study, look at windmills and solar panels, never heard of fucking OTEC. And it works by, there's warm water at the surface in the tropics, and there's cold, deep water below. And at the end of the day, it's just a solar concentration technique. You're pulling, solar energy out of the surface of the ocean and letting the earth do most of the hard work. Warm water flows to the poles, it gets really cold, it sinks down to the bottom of the ocean, and then the underwater circulation brings it right back. So it's doing all the heavy lifting for you. You have the heat source and the heat sink. And if you have a heat source and a heat sink, You can generate energy. And it turns out that the reason it's been around for 100 years and nobody's ever heard of it is that it's been stuck in this innovation valley of death. And it's a problem that Bitcoin solves by intentionally stranding this thing in the middle of the ocean. We can demonstrate it at scale.
Well, so let me talk about the journey up into why we've got you two sat here. I'm obviously going to moderate this and trying to be as impartial as possible. I think anyone who's followed the show will probably say, but Pete, you're not impartial. You're going to definitely be on the Nate side. But there is a journey to this in that historically I'm somebody who's been concerned about climate change, but didn't really understand energy or the energy mix or the consequences of not having enough energy. I understand that more now because of the energy crisis in the UK and in Europe. I've had various people on the show. I've interviewed Catherine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist, but I also had Alex Epstein on the show. I followed Michael Schellenberger, and I've recently just listened to Bjorn, can't remember his name, on Rogan show.
Lomborg, I think.
Yeah, and so I think I've the journey me and Danny have gone on is one that's okay, we believe there is an issue with climate change caused by humans, but it's not as simple as just stopping using fossil fuels. And there's a lot of complexities around this. We need an abundant energy source as humans. So I'm kind of in this position where I'm straight down the middle and I want to learn. I don't see these things as debates. One issue I have with debates is that someone feels like they have to win. And therefore, I think people can get a bit heated and try and dunk on each other. What I want to get from this is just learn from both people, and hopefully we can find out where we agree, where we disagree, and these conversations move forward. So I'll do my best to try and be impartial. If you think I'm not being, please call me out on it. Also, I think it's best to try and not...
I'm wearing a Bedford shirt, so you have to be nice to me. Well, this guy is not wearing one.
Well, I like that, dude.
It looks good
Where
on
can
me.
you buy them?
It looks really good on me.
If you ask me, you won the debate, but yeah, no. So I don't like debates where it's about winning. I don't think in these kind of things you win a debate. I think the best thing is for everyone. If everyone wins, if we make progress and understand. I think
the point is just educating, find the truth. We're all on the same page, and I don't know. I don't think it's going to be a hot debate anyway. We just hung out for
we
pretty much
hung
a
out
couple
for
days.
the whole weekend.
Yeah. And Nate's like, fuck the polar bears now.
I like this guy too much. He's like a cuddly, bushy.
No, but I think everyone does. Well, not everyone does, but the best thing is to try and find the truth. And I think the end goal is if we can have abundant energy with no damage to the planet Earth and the humans on it, that's the ultimate goal. So if we can all educate ourselves and move forward, I think that would be great. It could have been a couple of people sat this side. I know you've wanted to debate Saifedean. That would have been interesting. I think Alex Epstein also would have been interesting. Both of those came with lots of preconditions. Steve,
We're
you
still
did
talking with him in the background.
Yeah,
I saw him this weekend. We had a nice chat. So.
I think that will come. Steve, you didn't come with preconditions, you two have been chatting and had some discussions.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I'm more dangerous than both of them combined. So it's no worries.
All right. So
let's open.
You can open that whiskey up.
Here you go, Peter.
But is there any water
Pete
by
first?
the way?
Water, yeah.
Within about 2 hours, we're all just gonna be like, fucking. Steve,
sir?
can you drop me a piece of ice into that? Okay. So I'm going to try and moderate it, and you could use your fingers. I would have trusted you. And yeah, try not to interrupt too much, Nate. I fear with you, I'll have to sleep.
Cheers.
We will do our best. Cheers, guys. Cheers. Right. So let's talk about where you could kick off why we need energy, why civilization needs energy, why we need an abundance of energy. You talk about that.
Well, energy is the baseline of human civilization. You can't build anything without it. You can't transform the earth without it. Our homes, this beautiful home we're renting here, I'm sure it's a rental, is the earth is terraformed under us using diesel excavators. The walls are made of coal fly ash. The floorboards are probably at least coated. They look like hardwood. It looks pretty nice, but a lot of flooring these days are petrochemical based. Homes are made of energy byproducts, but energy itself is the fuel of everything, right? So without it, we reduce to we reduce to like a tribal, what we were. And I think some people sort of want that, but it's a necessity. I think me and Nate certainly agree on that. I think everyone agrees on that. And the question at hand is, what's the optimal situation, energy situation that we should be pushing towards? And I think that's where there's going to be some differences. And that's where the difference comes that you see out of me and see out of guys like Alex Epstein, who you had on the show, with the general public. I think, and you mentioned like, what do we have in common? I think one thing we have in common is that, like one thing I hate seeing is like a climate denier. Like, people throw that around. I've been careful when I argue, like not to be painted as a climate denier because it's easy to get labeled. So the first thing is I've never denied anything about climate change. In fact, I think it's ridiculous to assume that man has no effect on the climate. My position has always been, for example, what is the effect on the climate? I'm skeptical of some of the things people are projecting. And I say projecting because data science, like the stuff you do professionally, the stuff climate scientists do professionally, like finding data points over time, generally that's pretty accurate. The problem is, how does that project into the future? That's the unknown. And that's where I've always been very outspoken against that, where we're projecting, we're extrapolating known data points, but we're very bad at that, as even the best people on the planet are very bad at extrapolating complex systems.
So you agree humans are causing climate change?
Yeah, I would just temper that with I'm not as certain to what extent that some of the narratives are saying, but because it's also not my expertise, I'm not a climate. I'm an armchair like climate person. I try to read some stuff. I'm more of an applied scientist. That's what engineering is. Like guys like Nate here and the profession of, anyone can be a scientist really, but anyone doing science and the scientific method, you're still discovering things. Engineering is very fun. Like, how do you apply this to actually do something good? And that's like, if you're going to distinguish what an engineer is and what I am, like as a profession versus someone else, maybe Nate, I won't lump you in that because you're basically an engineer now too in your OTEC system.
I came from climate science, right? I'm a marine geologist and geochemist by training, and then transitioned into the engineering.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking to Nate. I know you have an engineering spirit because this whole OTEC thing is very, and that's the thing. It's not like you can't really label anyone as one thing anyway, but
yeah, I put different hats on for.
Yeah. So like to sum it up, like I just say, okay, yeah, we're having an effect on the climate and it's warming. Mm-hmm. So what? So what are you going to do about it?
Okay. So you agree with that?
So I have a question. What is your understanding of the CMIP program, right? Like, you say, okay, I mean,
right now zero, because I've never heard of it.
Okay. So this is the projections, right? It's the coupled model intercomparison program. It's been around for around 40 years. It's a sort of iterative process. And it consists of 23 different institutions from around the globe who have each developed not just individual, global climate models, but each institution has multiple departments in it. There's hydrologists who develop hydrology models. There's, the same models that you guys use to, geological models that you guys use to, map out, the USGS models. There's, atmospheric models. There's hydrological system models. There's, cryosystem models. There's upper ocean, middle ocean, deep ocean models. And these 23 institutions have departments inside of them. I forget how many different individual models there are, but they're not like one model for every system. It's, each model has an input and an output, right? And so each one of these different systems is done by the experts in that system.
And an error margin.
Of course. Oh, no. The error margins are well understood, right? Error is a is a scientific discipline in and of itself, right? Carrying your error through calculation. So, the hydrological model will feed into the ocean model, which feeds into the atmospheric model. And so all this intercomparison study does is each one of those is different between these 23 of the best institutions in the world. And what they do today is, let's say, today is peak oil, or 20 years from now is peak oil, or 2080 is peak oil, and we hit half emissions reduction by 2025 or 2045, just this one forcing. And then they say, let your models run. And they're all different. And so this is an intercomparison study. And I've participated in intercomparison studies because I did method development for phosphomolybdenum blue chemistry, which is, if we want to get deep into it, because I love it, you have a bunch of different chemistries all testing the same things to see how they, differ, to see what the error is between them, see how good they are. And so I developed this one chemistry, which happens to be the best for a very particular use case. And so that's kind of what it does. You have these 23 institutions running a suite of different models that all feed into each other, and then they intercompare all these different models. And so you get this nice... and that's the SSP, the socio-economic pathway. And there's the 1.5, the 2.5, the 4.5, and then, like the worst case. And it really, each one of these...
When you say the 1.52, are they the degree changes in temperature?
Yeah. And it's based solely on, our carbon emissions, right? That's really the only input to this system. And then they let these models run. And they've been working on these models individually for the past 40 or so years, right? And it's as all science is, it's iterative. And then, when there's problems with one, of course, that's a huge paper, and they redact it and they correct for the error. Like, error correction is a huge part of science. It's like the biggest part of science, And so they've been working on these things and getting, it started off...
But what is the trigger for error correction? Because a model,
So
you build a model with the best data you have, the best actual models built.
So this would be chapter 2 of working group 1 is going to be essentially, it's the methods section of all of this. And it's chapter 2 is, I don't know, a couple thousand pages.
I was seeing if I'm right in saying that it's time. You need time to verify the models, do you not? Like, because how do you experiment? And this is also me asking you genuinely, like, how do you experiment against the models?
And so there's different pathways, right? And right now, we're at the beginning, and actually all of the models except for the highest one have 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by like 2045 or 2050. I forget. I don't have it in front of me. So they're all kind
within
of
the next 30 years.
Yeah, they're all, and we're already at 1. Right? They're saying we're going to get another 0.5. And of course, it's accelerating. And so we can see this because, what you do is you take the input. We know how much sunlight is coming into the planet, right? And so we have a nice watts per square meter that falls on the Earth, right? About 1,000 watts per square meter. But then you have to add the curvature in there. So there's a cosine effect. And so then we can measure using black body radiation, right? For every watt that goes into the planet, if it's a black body, it should radiate that same watt out. And so what we're seeing is we are 0.5 watts per square meter short of black body radiation. So that means that we are retaining more energy than we're radiating, which throughout the rest of the planet,
so
history,
then that's like what we're seeing from past to the present, or that's what's being projected in the near
That's
term?
what we're seeing today, right?
What is the period we were measuring to see that 1 degree increase? What period
So
has
that's
that been?
between 1900, which is going to be about the baseline. You say this is 1900 is the baseline.
So in
and then
120
today.
years, we've increased by 1 degree.
but it's accelerating.
Of course, but
right?
but that's the period.
Yes.
That's 1 degree. Okay.
And it's accelerating. The rate of change is accelerating.
Of course, we're not saying it's another 60 years for
Yeah.
it to be another half a degree.
Right? It took
What you're
100
saying-
years to go, 0.8, and then it's taking 50 years to go another degree, and it really, everything depends on our emissions.
Okay.
That's the input.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, like me as a dumb pleb, and I'm representing the dumb pleb, because I don't study climate science. It's just not my interest. It's how do we apply technology to make
Full disclosure.
And I'll talk about like my position on that too. But like, why should I trust that the models are accurate? Like, what basis?
You don't have
No,
to
you
trust.
don't.
That's the beauty of science. And, since there
Of
is
course,
government funding, it is.
Of course,
you can-
you as a good scientist has a degree of uncertainty and not full trust in the model.
Yeah, well, there's
But
error
me
bars.
as the pleb listening to the radio, and the Earth's basically, if we don't stop this by 2030, everything is catastrophically going to snowball into like a cascading, climate
There's a
global
crisis.
warming event. And they're saying 2030. The politicians are. I mean, the average Joe. What basis do we have to even trust these models? They're projections based on
So what
probably
you-
the most complex system known to man. Because even at least like even astrophysicists have a much there's a lot in, not that that's easy, but there's a lot simpler science and like orbital science and stuff, and you can really project things extremely accurately. But we're talking about a system that's so complex. I mean, we can't even project tomorrow's weather. So
Well, I
how
mean,
do we
that's-
trust the model, and why should we take actions?
So what you can do.
Can I just interject? So we've looked at the models, haven't we? We did this in preparation for the Epstein interview, and that idea that you can't predict the weather tomorrow is actually incorrect. You can definitely predict the weather tomorrow. There are variations, but generally speaking, weather
There's
prediction
always
is
some
pretty good.
uncertainty, yeah.
But I think a weather prediction is different from a prediction of changing
Climate is
climate.
weather over 30 years, right? Talking about anything less than that is not climate, right? Climate is the dominant weather patterns over 30 years. And so what you've seen over, since 1900 is that each 30-year period has been hotter. And you're right, there is uncertainty, but that uncertainty is terrifying, especially when your entire civilization, right, the livelihoods, the food production, as we're learning right now from this Ukraine crisis, there are, who knew that Ukraine supplied the wheat to these fucking countries, and now they're in famine, and so little disruptions to these small little locations have these reverberating effects. And so those uncertainties, especially when you're talking about the long-term hydrological cycles, growing corn and wheat and soy, feeds the world, and that relies on the rain. And
Well, let's keep a train
okay.
of
So
thought.
just full disclosure, my advisor at my chairperson of my graduate committee did win the Nobel Prize for Working Group 1 report.
So did
And-
Paul Krugman.
What's that?
Paul Krugman won an
So
economist.
did Paul Krugman. And he's a junk,
but that's
he's
an
a junk
economic.
economist. Yeah, I know.
But this is-
that
so
was
he's
that was a slight at the Nobel
But
Prize.
I think what his point is that people have won prizes and awards for certain things, and if you're a Bitcoiner, you see Paul Krugman getting a Nobel Prize for economics, you have a certain
Krugman's.
distrust. Yeah, but you have a certain
I mean,
distrust
it's-
of the Nobel
And
Prize.
so-
I generally
We're
I like to
Bitcoiners,
avoid
right?
the
We trust,
Yeah,
but verify, right? To quote Ronald Reagan,
course.
the whole point of Bitcoin is verifying, right? So what you can do is you can go to the ipcc.ch, the website. These reports are not the science, right? These are review papers essentially, and in the papers there's likely, very likely, without question, they have like a percentage on there. And what you can do is you can track the, very well cited. You can take those citations in the method section. That's chapter 2. You can go find each individual model from each individual, institution, and then you can just read their methods section. So there's this trail of crumbs that anyone can follow
it's still
all the way
like-
back.
That's right. But a citation, peer review, that's part of science, but it's not definitive. You still need experimentation. You need time. For example, if you have a model of anything and it's a model projecting something into the future, I mean, like in the oil industry, of course, they've been wrong many times about peak oil. When's peak oil coming? And they've said, oh, it's coming at this date in 1980. They said that in 1960 or something.
Isn't that slightly different? Because that is, when you say peak oil, you're talking
Well,
about...
I'm just saying
economic
modeling
thing.
in
Yeah.
general. Like even, recently in the COVID pandemic, they modeled the viral.
So let's not, I just want to
Yeah.
make sure, let's not conflate different disciplines. So medical science, economics is not a STEM degree. Medical science, the closer you get to charismatic macrofauna, the smarter things are, the harder they are to predict, the more, physics that it's involved, the easier it is to predict because they do what rock does.
In a simple system, certainly.
But
And
Steve, what in terms of, because I think this is an important point, and I think that's one of the things that people are concerned about. They've got even though I agree with what you're saying, there's been so much distrust from predictions and models, whether it's economics or medical, that creates that seed of doubt. What would it, from your side, what would you want to see that would help you say, okay, at least I agree with the models and I think
Well, I actually,
they're correct?
even now, I assume the models are right because I'm not an expert in this space, in that entire climate science space. I don't have arguments against the experts in this space. Like I just say, okay, I'm an engineer. So what's the applied science here? Like, what are we doing and how is it working? Is it working? And that's where I'll get into arguments on, why I don't think anything we're doing is working. In fact, I would say it's been a huge net negative. But since we're just talking about modeling, I'm just challenging you on it. And challenging the ideas, because as the pleb, just as the average Joe, we see in the media constantly this
That's
fear
media.
porn. I know it's
Media,
yes.
I
know.
If we're here
I
to
know
talk
it's
about
not-
the media,
I know it's not.
I hate the media too.
No, I
trust
know
me.
it's not the science. I know it's not the science. They're not a representation of the science, but that's the actions that are the media tied together with
Yeah, but
the
we can't
politicians.
talk about the media if we're talking about the science.
No,
It's a
I
fair
know. I'm
point.
just
It's a
trying to
fair
say that as your average person that's being, forced like into a direction by our governments, like Canada has a carbon tax. I could argue how that's been destructive to the environment in Canada and certainly destructive to the people and economically. But it is tied together in the sense that I know it's not the science, but it's being represented as a science. If it's all being representative as definitive, there's no uncertainty from the mouthpieces, not the scientists. The political mouthpiece is saying, we got to do this by this date, else we're all doomed, like the fear porn.
And I think this is where I've swung a bit back towards maybe Steve's direction in that it's the understanding of the implications of the changing climate and what we do about it, where we've seen some pretty disastrous policy, especially in Europe and Canada. And the fear that we're actually being railroaded into bad policy, which will have a net negative on humans. And I think that's...
And see, I agree.
But to keep it consistent, just so we work through it, you are asking about the models. We do have the historical data that has shown in the 120 years.
Yeah, we're
that
seeing a trend. Yeah,
We're seeing a trend.
And I've been to Mauna Loa. I've been to Station Aloha, the longest time series on Earth, right? We've been going up this mountain for now 60 years, taking the same measurements, doing the same isotope geochemistry. We've been going to this spot out in the middle of the ocean by Hawaii and for the last 30 years and running the same suite of measurements. And we found the heat. We know where it's going. And it's really no question about that it's happening.
So
we're on the same
We're on the
page,
same
'cause
page.
we agree.
We agree that an increase in carbon in the atmosphere will raise the temperatures.
Yeah.
Okay. We're in agreement that historically, for the last 120 years, the average temperature of the planet has gone up by 1 degree. And we're in agreement that, are we in agreement, Steve, that we're going to see this trend continue? We have.
I always assume the worst. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to keep falling back to the engineering view.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like, I assume the worst. So we should build for the worst. Like that's proper engineering. You build for the upset condition. Like what's the worst thing that can happen in this system? And that to me is what they're projecting, and they'll have a confidence interval, right? Like, and there'll be a worst case and there'll be a best case.
And each model will have its own error bars. And remember, each model run is composed of 23 different institutions running different models, and then you compare them. And so even though sometimes you'll see reported a single line, that line is just the average of all of these different models. And so but people just don't understand.
Yeah, and there's varying models. There's varying models. There's varying like confidence intervals.
But they all show the same trend.
Just like the stock to flow model and the rainbow chart did, but they're both fucking wrecked right now. But that's just
we got a couple of people we can blame on the rainbow model. But anyway, on the rainbow model, the once you hit underneath, it's still 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, so the model still works.
That's the right model.
So we're in agreement, and then there is a variation on over the next, whether it's 2050 or 2100, whether we hit 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. We're not exactly sure. There are models to predict where we might go, but either way, we're likely to see a continuation of the trend, which is an increase in the average temperature.
And that's the average.
But we're
let's just assume it. Yeah, I think it's the right assumption to make.
So that's an area I think you both agree on. I think the area of disagreement is where it's going to become a bit more interesting. My assumption is the area of disagreement is what we should do about it, what we can do about it, and what the implications of these things are. I'm gonna first this time. I'm gonna go to Nate. Nate, in terms of mitigation, there's two things. There is changing the energy mix and trying to obviously reduce the impact, reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. But the second thing is an acceptance of the increase in carbon in the atmosphere and what we can do in terms of adaptation, in terms of preparing ourselves to adapt to a changing climate. I'm going to leave that completely open to you, but in where are you coming from in this area? Do you think we should be changing the energy mix? Do you think we should be accepting it? Should we be doing everything? Like just a complete open table on this bit.
We need to do everything in our power to reduce to whatever extent that humanly possible, right? We're never going to get rid of fossil fuels. And I think there's a miscalculation here between fossil fuels and organic chemistry, right? It's been a while since I did organic chemistry. I'm an inorganic chemist, but the more we do, talk about with OTEC, I can run a Sabatier reaction. I can generate methane.
What is that?
I can make methane.
Synthesizing hydrocarbons, basically.
Okay.
Right. I can make methane. I can do a Fischer-Tropsch reaction and make synthetic fuels, right?
Bear in mind, can you do it economically? And I'm not talking about OTEC. I'm talking about at any power generator.
And so with zero marginal cost energy, you can do anything, right? If you have zero marginal cost energy, like this is the plan that Elon has to go to, Mars, right? He's not bringing the fuel with him. He's going to make it. Now, I don't think we can do it on Mars. It's on the ocean.
I want to just temper what you said there, because I don't want to interrupt, but it's truly like there's an amortized capital cost that really needs to be considered.
Yep.
And what's the net present value of that? What's the, that's truly what
the
matters.
idea is to build. We
That's
have
the
enough
actual
energy around the world. When you look at a Kardashev 1 society, that's defined by the incident radiation from the sun on planet Earth, right? It makes, in order to make and bring prosperity to humanity, we have to bring energy to more people, right? And fossil fuels have had about 150 years to do that, and they've failed miserably. There's so much...
Failed miserably at what?
Bringing energy, to poor regions. There are 3 billion people who have no access to energy, and it wasn't renewables who left them in energy poverty. It was solely the fossil fuel industry who took all that easy, sweet crude that bubbles to the surface, used it for themselves, and left these people in poverty. They have nothing
Can you expand
I
on
would
that?
disagree about you're going to run with it.
Can you expand on that? How do you mean they were left behind? Do you mean it was stolen by wealthier nations?
Oh, look at Nigeria.
Okay.
Nigeria, Shell and BP go into Nigeria. They extract the oil and the money, and they leave a barren wasteland behind them.
Okay. But in terms of the discussion we're having now, what is the relevance to discussing mitigation?
So we've taken all of the easy fossil fuels. We've built beautiful homes. We've built our society. But in order to bring everybody to this level, which is the goal, right? I think the goal is to have everybody be as comfortable as we are, right? We live in a place of privilege. And in order to do that, we're going to need 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more energy. And this is not something fossil fuels can accommodate. This is something that only, building out nuclear, building out hydro where it's possible, building out geo where it's possible, building out OTEC where it's possible, and then using fossil fuels to fill in the rest of the gap so that we reduce our reliance on it, because it comes back down to energy security, right? If you're dependent on fossil fuel production in Russia, right? If you were the prime minister of Germany and you shut down all the nuclear plants and then went to work for Gazprom and then built those pipelines, who are now holding holding Germany, by the neck, right, and causing all the energy problems and across all of Europe, right? The guy who shut down the nuclear was not a renewable guy.
But that wasn't a fossil fuels problem. That was a corruption.
But he went to go work for Gazprom.
Oh, no, but what I'm saying, the issue
pipeline.
there, but the issue there is incentives and greed and corruption and policy.
It was fiat.
It was
It's
fiat.
maximalism that
You can't embezzle money on the Bitcoin blockchain.
it's the economics of violence and the petrodollar and the like.
But to understand where we're going with this is that I think the point you're trying to make is we need more abundant energy, and we need more abundant energy for people in developing countries who have been generally excluded, or they've had their resources stolen through, and we covered this with Alex Gladstein recently, talking about the IMF and the World Bank, how they've perpetuated this.
Yeah.
But so at this point, what we're talking about is increasing the amount of energy available to people, but you're saying we shouldn't be doing this just through fossil fuels. Because
we can't do it through fossil
because
fuels.
There isn't enough, or it would lead to an even faster, rapid increase in the temperatures.
It's both. One, the only fossil fuel we have enough of to even start to scratch at that energy disparity is methane. And the problem with methane is the infrastructure costs. It's not as easy as transporting a barrel of oil, right? Barrel of oil, easy to pick up. That's why they're able to cite the Nigerian, what is the golden triangle of Nigerian oil smuggling, where they shovel it over to Togo and then Ghana, because it's easy to transport, right? But methane, natural gas, it requires LNG ports. We're not building those in third world. That's huge infrastructure expense. China tried and they fucked around and about to find out. You can't build pipelines through Boko Haram territory, LNG pipelines through Boko Haram territory, right? Because
they'll be held for ransom.
Yeah. They'll be exactly like they'll be blown up. Just like we're seeing now in the developed world. Imagine how bad it would be in sub-Saharan Africa.
But we also see incidents of people trying to steal fuel out of the pipelines, and they blow up, and 300 people are killed or something or other.
So just like the third world went, skipped developing world. I apologize. Just like the developing world skipped the telecommunication via, how we had the telephone wires. They skipped
went straight to mobile.
Straight to mobile.
Yeah.
they don't have the option of that methane. They have to leapfrog to newer sources of energy. And, I want to go get the manganese nodules to make batteries and solar panels more affordable and less destructive to the environment. Guarantee they're, intermittent and they have their problems, but it's kind of like how the horse people were against cars. Oh, they're noisy, they're destructive, they run out of energy. It's similar to that. Like, these are solvable problems.
Let's move back to Steve. So we're at the
I'm
point.
gonna get my heart rate down.
Yeah,
I was so triggered.
you're so triggered right now. So just for context, we're at the point where we're discussing we need more abundant energy. We need it around the world, especially need it in developing countries who have had their development slowed down because they haven't had access to fossil fuels the way we have. Yes, the issue is vastly more complex than that, and there's lots of politics and corruption that goes into that. But in terms of the idea of having more abundant energy around the world, but developing nations essentially having to skip fossil fuels and going straight to renewables, where are you at with that? And if there's other bits you need to talk about, please do. And let them speak.
Almost everything you said, I would say either strictly disagree with or have nuance to add. Mm-hmm. So, where to start, I guess. The narrative right now is an energy transition. I would say, objectively speaking, what we've seen mostly has been the energy transition of, say, North American fossil fuels over to China. China's now building everything for us based off their reliable coal power. And we're not building anything anymore. Any of that. Like there hasn't been new coal plants, for example, built in a long time, and certainly not very many of them. So the real transition to me is actually just fossil fuels over to other countries that Americans should not be in favor of. But I mean, I don't know where to start in terms of we can step it back that, people talk about carbon emissions as, and I think this is a fundamental point we can hash on together. Everyone's looking at carbon emissions as the bad thing. I look at it like, well, one thing to consider is carbon emissions is not a measure. You can say it's a measure of pollution, and structurally what's making global warming happen and all the disasters, presumably that are going to come from it. But carbon emissions is not a measure of waste. It's not a measure of us wasting our environment around us. It's a measure of productivity. So the more carbon, if you just zoom out, the more carbon you're generally producing, the more productive we're being as a civilization.
It's a correlation, though, not a cause.
Yeah, no, I know that carbon emissions, people talk about negative externalities too, and it has the effect on the environment that we're worried about. And again, we've agreed to assume that that's the problem. But it's really not, looking at it from an engineering system, we shouldn't be worried about the byproduct of productivity, because it's call it a negative byproduct. You can even argue if it is or not, but
and there are greenhouse gases that are not carbon based. They're just CO2e is the real
the equivalence.
Unit.
The equivalence.
And so your NOx and your SOx, right, are going to be non-carbon based emissions that do have global.
Well, we can pick them all apart and look at them all, but the point is.
Let's see, finish his point.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the point is, I mean, it's not the problem. The problem is wasting resources is the real problem. What are the I've used this example before. If you are a coal plant or manufacturing facility, whatever, and you're producing something and then you dump your waste product in the river and destroy the river, like mercury or something, you can throw a carbon equivalence on that, but we all know that's horrible and there needs to be regulations around that. But the real thing is carbon actually, it's a necessary, how do you do anything without carbon emissions, without NOx, sulfur compounds, carbon compounds as a byproduct? You can't do anything. So it's, to even consider it the number one, because right now it is the number one qualifier in how we're picking energy systems. We're saying that coal is bad. Natural gas is bad until recently. They said it was green again in Europe recently, but because they needed it, so they just flipped on that.
So coal and then petroleum, and then natural gas is just pure CH4 with a few little slightly heavier.
Yeah, so you can say that of course, coal is dirtier than natural gas because of all the other emissions, and you'll even depending on the coal base, you can get mercury coming out too, depending on what the actual base fuel is.
Acid mine drainage.
Yeah, and all the bottom ash that gets stockpiled, all the stuff that happens. Yes, but
we accept. We accept.
But it's-
We accept all this.
there
We
is-
don't need to win points here.
but
It's just let's
the point
leave it at
is
this
like
point.
we're qualifying everything on how dirty it is and not how productive it is to society, which should be the number one consideration. So we're not building coal plants in America. Instead, it's coming up in offshore to China.
Where in China?
Is it relevant?
Yes. Yeah.
Why?
I'm just asking. Do you know where the coal?
I'm only
is?
using China as one example. You
No,
have
I know,
India.
but so coal is the powerhouse of the northern China, right? So you have the Yangtze River.
I'm also aware that they
north.
have hydro. I'm also aware they have solar.
So south of the Yangtze River, basically 90% hydro. North of they have coal north of the Yangtze River. So there's this bifurcation in China, and this is something that isn't really talked about, is China's water problem. They have roughly a equal distribution of population north and south, and they do roughly equivalent agricultural production north and south of the Yangtze River. But then it's all coal in the north, but there's no water, and coal takes a lot of water, right? Coal guy?
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out where you're going with this.
Yeah, but what is the point you're
what is
making?
the-
Coal
what is
uses
this?
what is it? 4 cubic meters of coal of water per. Oh, fuck, what is?
I think the question that Steve.
Are you just
and I
saying
want-
that it's dirtier in China?
No. What I'm
Or-
trying to get at is that every model. And what we're seeing now is that the long-term hydrological cycles of China north of the Yangtze River, it's getting drier in the north and wetter in the south. And so China is spending trillions of dollars to move water from the south to the north, right? It's futile. It's stupid. I don't want to say, dear Xi Jinping. And so the problem is that we changed those things. Their coal in the north is useless because they have no water.
We're using the emissions as the main qualifier for how we're building our energy systems over here right now.
Yeah.
And my argument is that that's not a rational way of doing that. Like that's not a free market way of seeing what fits the best.
Is that because if the US is reducing its emissions,
Well,
but
the
buying
net-
products from China, which have
The
been
net
brought to-
effect is that it's just China's producing the emissions for Americans.
Yes.
That's the net effect. And that's not a point that's new. People, that's a talking point people have made a lot. I mean, another thing you said, you're blaming the fossil fuel industry broadly as
energy
in poverty. Yeah. I don't know how you can make that association now. And then when I piped up, I said it was the fiat max. It was the economics of violence. It's not fossil fuels as a resource, as an economy, as
The
a
fossil fuel
system.
industry decided not to give them access to those,
But is it
cheap
fossil?
hydrocarbons.
Yeah, but the energy system itself as an application, as a technology, is that at fault, or is it the people
Well, it was
that
free market of.
it wasn't
and
free
how-
Definitely not
market?
free
It's not
market.
free
It
market.
wasn't free market.
No,
yeah.
absolutely not. I mean, certainly, this where the Bitcoiners, like, you have people with money printing machines that gobble up all the markets. They own everything, and you did some work. Like, I think you did a show on the petrodollar stuff, and you've talked about it a lot.
Well, let me just give some context to the show I just made with Alex Gladstein. So he's been digging into the World Bank and the IMF and how that is essentially we've moved from territorial colonialism to economic colonialism. So as we departed these countries, what we've done is we've indebted them, and we've changed the nature of their, what was the term he used?
Can't
The
remember.
structural readjustments.
Yes, yeah.
Whereby, he gave an example, Bangladesh, huge loans were given to them, and then they were encouraged their farmers to produce
Shrimp.
shrimp. And so that's not, so they weren't producing for the locals, and that's been exported, and that would damage the economies of those countries. But these countries would permanently be in debt, and the way they got out of their debt was extricating their natural resources away from them. So essentially, we've enforced economic colonialism on these countries.
Yeah.
So there is no free market there. That is colonialism. And by the way, he said the countries, the IMF and the World Bank, tend to always wanted to work with dictators, because dictators you could pay off and say, here, here's $200 million loan. We don't care where the fuck you put it. By the way, we want your natural resources.
The other aspect is like, I mean, to say that fossil fuels are responsible for that, I mean, yeah, that point altogether, it's a different situation that there's violent people forcing or causing wealth inequality. I don't think you can blame fossil fuels for that. I mean,
Well, it wasn't solar panels.
well,
No.
that's because solar
But no, but
panels
you need
would
to
have
listen
made
to
it
his point,
worse, like solar panels. So the fossil fuels generally, you cannot run, you can obviously, and you know this, like this is not an arguing point, but like you cannot strip fossil fuels out of human civilization.
No.
Of course not. It's raw material. It's built into every product. Now, the question is, can you reduce it significantly?
Well, it's carbon built into every product. It just happens to be that we use the best, most easily accessible source of that carbon happens to be fossil fuels.
I know you made the point you can synthesize it and the like, but you can't do it economically. It's
F1
like
race cars do not run on fossil fuels. They run on synthetic fuels. Because
synthetic
fossil fuels
fuels
are,
likely cracked in refineries
Yes,
and the like with
true.
root. Yeah.
Again,
so
the source of carbon
but
is irrelevant to the organic.
I know, but there's always an economic story, right? We can make gold through, like, I guess, high energy reactor techniques, or whatever they do in those colliders. Like you can
gold would
the
be
gold
fission.
atom. Yeah, you can in theory make it. Can you do it economically? The answer is no. Like it doesn't compare to stripping it out of the ground, right? Or maybe we don't have the technology to make gold, but it's in theory. I think we do, but
There's certain.
I think
What are the
it
gold
doesn't matter.
isotopes?
The point is,
Guys, you keep going off track trying to like prove details of like kind of minor the details
there's
of
an
science.
economic fundamental to like what we can do today and the systems we can build to optimize the environment. And I'm saying that you can't blame fossil fuels for the stuff you're blaming it for. There's a different thing at play there, which is the stuff I guess you talked about before.
Yeah.
There's the incentives of violence. The only reason you're blaming fossil fuels is they're so immensely profitable that these people these
hoard.
oil barons, if you want to call them, that's what they're doing. They're bombing countries to take their oil. They're so, useful. The free market should be the one to determine what the energy system, how much solar is out there, how much wind's out there, how much coal plants, how much nuclear. That's the ideal situation. But unfortunately, we live in a very political world, and even nuclear, which I'm a proponent of, I wish there was more of it to replace baseload coal, as an example. But of course, there's a lot of red tape. There's, munitions that can be built out of this stuff that people are trying to prevent it getting in the wrong hands.
Current gen and future gens will make those nuclear weapons available. Thorium is a long way off. That's not happening anytime soon.
All right. Okay. So just trying to keep us on track. Back to you, Steve. The point Steve's making is that we cannot blame fossil fuels. We have to blame the individuals.
Fossil fuels, like Epstein will describe it better than I ever could. They've done so much for humanity. Like they've propped up all technologies. They haven't hurt humanity. They've propelled us forward. They've done everything. They've done so much net benefit to suggest that they're bad. To me, it's just an ideology.
Benefit, you have to take all the negative externalities. Like, I don't know, you couldn't have run
all the pharmaceuticals that have healed humanity. Most of them have come from that industry.
Exactly.
They're fossil fuels.
So is all the war and violence. But I'm just saying that. So
there's always.
What I'm saying is I'm taking ad infinitum sort of argument. Like you can't lump all the positives without then also including all those. It's just as ridiculous to talk about all the positives as it is to talk about all the negatives, right? Because now we have to include the hundreds of millions of people who have prematurely died from lead poisoning for 80 years in our cars, right? You know, when you go to the gas station, it says unleaded fuel. And the reason was that the fossil fuel industry was poisoning the world with lead for 80 years. There's a drop in
You're painting
crime.
it as like we're poisoning the world when it was
poison.
Of
Lead
course
is
it was.
poison. Lead
But
is
we
poison.
human beings did that, and we learned that we were poisoning the world.
But
It's
we
not
knew,
like the industry
you
was
said
doing
we
it.
learned. We knew. So my actual favorite
Well,
scientist of all
SPF
time.
knew they were insolvent. He was a bad guy. There was bad guys in oil
But
companies.
but the scientists at the time were even the guy who put the lead into
there's bad
thing,
people.
He had lead poisoning by spilling lead onto his hand. He was missing from a conference for a week because he was almost dying on a beach from
So
lead
why are you
poisoning.
blaming the whole fossil fuels industry over that? There's bad people. Yes, there's bad people. And they'll use tools that are
So if we take the
broadly used
positives,
for
now
good.
we have to also lump in all of the negatives.
Are we going to achieve anything right now if we try and calculate all the net positives and the net negatives for the
Exactly. It's ridiculous.
For the history of time? I don't think that's what we're
Well,
trying
the
to get
only
out
thing
of
I
this.
would like to try, hopefully establish is to say that I think you're suggesting that fossil fuels have been a net negative. That's the way you're articulating it.
Yeah.
Sounds like they've not been a net negative. You would not be able to do
Hundreds of
anything.
millions of people have died.
Well,
as a
hold on,
direct
hold on, hold on.
result.
This is a really
Billions
important
of
point.
people have lived.
Hold on.
You cannot.
Steve, this is a really interesting point because we want to find out where we agree and where we disagree. Steve's very clear that he believes fossil fuels have been a net positive for humanity. If you're disagreeing, that's a big point of contention. Do you think they've been a net negative?
I believe that hydrocarbons are a net positive. Fossil fuels are a net negative. Yes.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that.
Again, it's a difference in organic chemistry. Who, by outsourcing the organic chemistry to things 300 million years ago, instead of doing it ourselves like we do today, even though it's not. Imagine if we had
Steve, let me finish.
Imagine if we had 100 years of capital flowing into the development of organic chemistry, synthetic fuels. Well, would that achieve the same sort of cost reductions that we've seen in fossil fuels, in solar panels, in wind, in nuclear? But we haven't because we've had access to easy energy. And easy energy is like easy money. And it creates this Dutch disease, a global Dutch disease, where we've become trapped. And now we're kind of taken hostage because our society was built around these easy fossil fuels. We can't get off them. We're addicted to them.
But
I agree.
Yeah,
we
we
cannot
are.
completely get off of them. And it's going to be difficult.
Nate, how would synthetic fossil fuels have prevented war?
Like
Can we-
synthetic fossil
yeah.
fuels, how are you going to make them?
Well, no, even that. How would they have prevented war?
Oh, no. So you couldn't have run World War II, right? A Panzer, the Blitzkrieg couldn't, those tanks couldn't have been run on anything but diesel, right? So if we take all the positives, the fertilizers, the energy that we've enjoyed that the rest of the world has not enjoyed, you couldn't have run the war without it.
Right. Okay.
And so if we take all the positive, we have to also then talk about it's absurd ad infinitum. Troy's going to get after me.
Well, let's Steve, you believe fossil fuels have been a net positive. You believe they've been a net negative. That's where we are. I don't think we need to have a debate about the history and why. It's just that's where we are. But we are now at a time where we do have fossil fuels. Society does rely on them.
What do we do?
Yeah. So what do we?
I do know what the answer is. What do we do? If you believe that, I don't believe you truly believe that. But if you do, you should stop using them because you can make that choice.
I can't.
You certainly can.
I live on a rock. I can't leave the
You
rock.
can at least make a choice.
What am I going to do? Take the Hokulea home?
No, but
because people do travel around the world using ancient Polynesian sailing techniques, and those guys are gangster. But I can't do that.
I know you can't strip it out completely, but you can make some major steps in your life to massively reduce it.
I can, and I
You
do.
can. Do you?
Yeah, I have 55 solar panels on the house, and
What
of
are they
course
made
they
of?
were all made from coal.
Yeah.
But that means I also don't have to now use the fossil fuels that the rest of the state runs on, except for, of course, in my car. I have no choice.
What is your house made of?
It's made of wood.
I know that I know like where I'm going. It's you cannot.
Again,
like you really can't, and no one really can. I don't think any one person can really strip out even a significant percent of fossil fuels out of the life. It's so integrated within society.
But what we can do is we can target the largest market. So I think there was a point you missed. If we want to get the developing world, as much energy as we have, fossil fuels cannot accommodate that. Is that something we can agree on?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
How much petroleum do we have, both proven and unproven reserves? How many years?
Way more than they're projecting.
Okay.
Way more.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we know that?
And is it going to be cheaper or more
even in my
expensive?
short career, my short lifetime in the oil and gas industry, I've seen pretty incredible changes in our technology to drill, complete, and extract the oil. I'll just give you a little example. So like in Lloyd, where I'm based, Lloydminster, Alberta, the heavy oil scene, we have a production method just called CHOPS, cold heavy oil production with sand. It's the old school way of producing. You can almost call it the conventional way to do it there, which is basically you just drill a hole, perforate, stick a pump down there and pump it to surface. In that method of producing oil, we only get max 8% of the oil in place, estimated, right? Like approximately 8%, 92% is left. In recent years, in the last couple decades, thermal technologies have been developed where we're pumping heat in SAGD and similar. There's a bunch. There's always new stuff happening, but SAGD, sure. And we're getting over 30% or even higher. Like the reservoir engineers would know more, but so that's in a very short amount of time a technology change.
So,
but I want to just say
100 years. Do we have 100 years at current? Let's say 100 years at current utilization. Let's say nothing has changed. 100 years current utilization, right? So
I would say
it's not infinite. It's not infinite.
No, it's not. We know it's not infinite, but there's an economic side of this. The scarcer it gets, the higher the price goes, as long as there's demand, which I think there always will be.
Yeah.
There will be a point potentially where the demand is so scarce, it's so hard to get that we really can't get enough of it to satisfy what we want. And what will happen
oil,
then?
We don't have enough.
Well,
what about coal? What about
no,
coal?
I'm not agreeing with you on that. Like you can, of course, argue that we don't have enough for the full future of humanity. Of course, there's only a limited amount there.
Give us a range.
Okay,
We
so
can look
if
this
they're
up,
estimating
too.
hundreds of years, I'm saying thousands.
You're saying thousands of years.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Because there's a fundamental economic aspect to this. As technology improves, the cost to extract goes down. The energy input, there's always an energy input in any system and an energy output, the efficiency. As technology keeps improving, the efficiency gets better and the cost to get it out goes down.
And not that I doubt you, but you would be the first time I've heard this.
Well, here's an example. So that Lloydminster oil I'm talking about, so it's about 400 meters under the ground.
This isn't very ideal for you, Pete, but this is saying there's 47 years left.
Yeah, that's why.
That's proven reserves, so not unproven reserves.
Okay. That doesn't.
Those are economic.
Yeah, those are economic
reserves.
Yeah,
and so that's 47 years of economic reserves. And the problem is that
but one thing.
The further and further offshore we get,
let me
the
just
more
explain
expensive
one
and
thing.
expensive.
Those projections don't project technology. They can't. You cannot properly predict technology changes. So in this Lloydminster example, where you have oil approximately 400 meters on the ground. We started with CHOPS production. Actually, we had something before that was even worse, but we got to CHOPS production. It's about 8%. SAGD, we're getting more. There will be a point in time where we will mine down and scrap every little bit out. The reserves on just what you can mine, for example, in the Alberta oil sands, is immense. The economic reserves, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's quite a while.
How many orders of magnitude more do you have?
There's also a lot we don't know about what's out there. So like,
we need
again,
3 orders of magnitude, and that's every year.
But here's the
3
thing.
orders of magnitude more than we're currently
Here's the thing. We don't need to
using.
artificially get off it because the pure economics will get us off of it.
But we need to bring
when
these
we need.
people energy, do we not? We can agree that everybody
we don't
needs
need
energy.
to do anything.
Okay, so look, I think I can frame Nate's question in a better way. Yes, there's technology advancements that may mean you can extract more oil, but can we get that to these developing countries at a price they can afford to use it?
The economy will decide what price they.
So they don't
that
deserve
it'll get to.
energy.
That
it's
has
not
nothing to do with that.
Nate.
It has nothing to do with that.
No,
a free market will decide where it gets distributed.
But we don't have a free market. And
we don't.
And we're not going to have a free market.
Not while we have central banking and
Exactly.
unreserved
So in the
fiat money.
short term right now, I don't believe maybe in the next 10 to 30 years, we will see any material change in a free market establish itself so that these developing nations can actually afford it.
I would agree.
If anything, they're going to get poorer because we're seeing
the
that
wealth
happening now.
redistribution is getting worse.
Yes, so it's getting worse. So just in that scenario, how do you believe we drive more energy abundance in developing nations, or do we just accept
we
it's shit for
destroy
them?
central banking is step one.
That's a hopeful thing.
Yeah, step one is destroying. That is what is causing wealth redistribution from the poor to the rich, the Cantillon effect.
Yeah.
Central banking is a problem. People printing money and acquiring everything for nothing. That would be the step one. Now we're arguing about energy systems. Is coal, is oil, is gas bad for impoverished people? I don't think that argument can be made. It's the people manipulating society through violence and through economic incentives, which I would argue stems from central banking.
That exist.
But
here.
there's no
We're
point
talking about the state. You can't bet on unproven reserves. I can't ensure that.
Why are we working? Why are we working? Why are we asking?
I can't ensure. I can't bet.
Why are we begging the
on
government
new technology? What I can bet, okay, is that fossil fuels cannot accommodate 3 orders of magnitude more energy use.
When the oil and gas and coal are all gone, how are you making your solar panels and all the other stuff?
What I can bet.
Well, therefore, should we be retaining it so we can make that stuff?
I guess so.
All right, listen,
let's say, for the sake of argument, that there is 3 or 4 orders of magnitude more fossil fuels and we're using, every year over year, 3 to 4 orders of magnitude more energy because we're bringing energy, prosperity to the developing world, and everybody gets to use all of the energy we have available. They get nice houses, they get pools in the backyard, they get all of this. Okay, so now we're talking about SSP 8.5. The worst case scenario. Now, what does that look like?
You're forgetting the entire economic. As it becomes more scarce, the price goes up and less gets used per capita.
And so they don't get to use energy because
that has nothing to do with who gets to use it.
It does.
It does.
It does.
How does it not? Because at the moment, if they can't get access,
so you're suggesting. I don't know who's suggesting it, but are you suggesting that instead of letting and I agree, we don't have a free market. We're not going to have it for many years.
Ever.
But you're arguing for a non-free market force, the government, to intervene and stop. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing with what is carbon tax. They're destroying our economy in Canada.
That's in the developed world.
Yeah, but
because we do have jurisdictions and we do have the ability to do that. But we're talking about the developing world here.
So the problem of wealth inequality is not a fossil fuel problem.
Nate, you're moderating and constantly interjecting, and the problem with that is it kind of we don't make progress. We just jump around, and I'd rather keep it factual rather than emotional. And I just think, of course, Steve doesn't think these people don't deserve energy. I think we've already established that. We've already agreed that. I think the question I want to understand is that, okay, look, we don't have a free market. I think the developed nations are going to continually get screwed by the developing nations are going to continue to get screwed by the developed nations. That is what it is. Let's move forward to the bit where we're talking about the fact that we are going to continue an increased use of fossil fuels. That is going to lead to more carbon in the atmosphere. That is, we will get the benefit of productivity around the world, but with that, we therefore do face an increase in temperatures because we've agreed the historical trend is correct, it's going to likely continue. So therefore, a more important point to get to is that what should and can we do about that? There are what have been regarded as climate hysterics who think we need to get off oil immediately. We've got people gluing themselves to Van Goghs and throwing soup over shit, and generally trying to disrupt society. I don't think it's the most effective way, but at the same time, they are raising awareness. Steve, what do you think about a continually rising average temperature on the Earth, which may go to 2, 3.5, 4, 5 degrees, and what the impact that will be on the planet? How much time have you spent looking at that and looking at the impact?
One example I was going to give is I generally look at the government as the worst user of energy on the planet. Not because it's by intention, but it's by the fact that they don't earn the money that they get. It's taxed or brought in through signage, which is money printing. Mm-hmm. And I think you could generally agree that, or most listeners would probably agree that the government's very corrupt generally across the globe, and very inefficient at spending money, very bureaucratic. There's a huge administrative load in the government that needs to be fed. And so one thing that I'm very critical of is when you say have a carbon tax, and I'm being taxed as a homeowner or whatnot in Alberta for using natural gas, the money I earned, call it on the free market. It's not free, but in a more of a freer market system, I earned that money. I have to pay the government now, that energy's not used by me. Of course, I have less money to spend on the energy and stuff, but the government is spending it in my place. It's just a distribution of wealth. That's what a carbon tax is.
Okay. So carbon tax is like a policy thing. But I just want to go back to the point where I say, have you spent much time looking at the impact of climate change, quite high average temperature changes? And when we say that average, okay, say it's an average of 3, but some places going to be higher and some places going to be lower. The impact that has on the world, and you said, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. So you don't believe we can stop this happening. Whatever the trajectory is, the trajectory is.
Not necessarily, because I don't know what the trajectory is, and I don't know what the full consequences are, other than there's going to be some negative ones, like sea levels rising. You were talking to me about if the average ocean temperature increased, like I don't know by what factor, but you get quite a bit of expansion. Mm-hmm. You do get destruction on coastal regions. Over what time frame, I don't know. I know that people are mobile, so if it's over a long time frame, it's not as impactful over a low time frame. But again, from the engineering perspective, what can we do today? And I look at it like we can make systems more efficient. You can make an engine more efficient, which is what I do professionally. I put Bitcoin mines on engines so they don't waste power. And that's a good thing, because if you're wasting less, we're consuming less resources.
And I do the same thing.
Exactly. That's what you do is the same thing.
So are you basically saying your view is we accept this and we learn to adapt? We use technology and innovation to adapt.
My view is just simply we need to keep getting better at everything. While we're in a market that needs coal, which we still need it right now, if that changes in the future, so be it. I'm happy. I'm not even though I as a provocateur, because I like to just get on the internet and poke people about how I love coal. And I do love coal because coal's so fundamental to everything we're all doing, even here today.
Carbon, not coal.
No, coal, the resource.
No, but carbon is the unit in the coal, and it's carbon. Yes, but I agree.
I'm just talking about the low-hanging fruit.
Well, what does a meter of sea level rise
hold on,
Nate,
listen, Nate. Bear with me. I am a moderator. I can go and you can just pour the whiskey and argue back and forth, or I can help produce something for the listeners.
Yeah.
Okay. So, my conclusion is from you is that you're saying, we humans are ingenious. We are able to adapt. We are innovators. We're probably temperature rises. You don't understand the implication, but
maybe there's some stuff we can do.
But
we can reduce emissions on a flue stack at a coal plant. I definitely don't think we should have a governing body, an authority intervene and remove capture the market, make it less free, and dictate that coal plant has to shut down. I was just in North Dakota last week. I'm sort of touring around the U.S. to see maybe maybe I'll start up here, move my Canadian company down to the US in a certain state, just touring around. So I met a Minn Kota Power. They have some coal plants. I met with them. The gentleman there was telling me a story. Nearby in Minnesota, they had a coal plant operating perfectly, nothing wrong with it. But the woke there forced it to shut down. They ended up selling it. The state sold it at $1. A private entity came in and bought it up at $1 because they just treated it like a liability. And they bought it at $1. And now energy crisis hits, and all of a sudden, well, we still need that plant right now. The government intervention is creating massive waste, massive misallocation of resources. And
I think woke is not the right term to use. I understand where woke is used sometimes. I think it's maybe misinformed. Well, because I've been misinformed sometimes, and I don't think it was woke.
People are using ideology, like I think you've expressed, in my view, some ideology against, you're blaming the fossil fuel industry on impoverishing the whole world. That to me just sounds like ideological. Like there's not really fact that fossil fuels did that. It was the people that used that tool that did that. That's the problem. And that's what we have in common is like, I think we're both against the central banking regime and all of that.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to that one. I just want to throw it back to Nate. What do you have against the idea that we continue to use fossil fuels? There will be an increase in temperature, but we can adapt. We're innovative. We're mobile. We can develop new technologies. What do you have against that, and what do you think that should be done differently?
3.2 to 3.6 billion people who are highly vulnerable to the impacts of large-scale climate change. So,
what is large-scale climate change?
That is a meter of sea level rise by 2100, which is what we're looking at. And if we're talking about bringing energy prosperity to the rest of the world, which, again, fossil fuels have had 150 years to do and have not done that, whether that's a failure, as I guess is just a semantic thing. They had that opportunity and didn't do it. If we were to do it, which we should, that means we are looking at the 8.5 scenario, right? If they have as much energy as we do, and we're going to do that through fossil fuels, meter of sea level rise, and I believe it's 5 degrees Celsius by 2100. That's 3.2 to 3.6 billion people who will be materially affected by this in either more rain, less rain where it's dry, right? You have to look at each individual location. We're talking about a breakdown in the hydrological cycle. You're looking at a breakdown in food production. These people are going to have to move. Where do they go? Are you
higher?
They go higher. Okay, no. Do they go? If you look at the distribution,
Nate, a 1 meter increase in global average sea levels. Can we actually see what that means? Is there any actual mapping for that? And what is the projection, the temperature rise that would lead to that?
That's from, so it's a two-pronged thing, right? It's a breakdown in the cryosphere, melting of the glaciers, which we've never experienced. We've never lived. Humanity developed over the last 3 million years, 5 million years during a relatively. There you go. 3 feet.
I mean, poor Houston.
Even if
Washington,
it's still bad. Like this is still bad, but we don't really know what time frame this can happen because you do get time to displace.
So I think we are.
Like we had flooding in Calgary, and luckily no one died, and people displaced themselves.
How about Pakistan? What happened in Pakistan last month? The worst flooding in history. Displaced millions, destroyed billions in infrastructure, things that they can't afford to replace. We live in a place of privilege where we have insurance. Pakistan doesn't. What was destroyed during these floods, which destroyed their food production, they can't replace that. And so what do these people do when they're forced out of their homes? Where do they go?
I've got a relevant question to put to Steve on that. I'm going to come back to that. But so we will potentially see a rise in sea temperatures. And
soon
those temperatures. And so your view is it's not going to, if that was over 40, 50 years, we would gradually adapt. People would move, build sea defenses, etc.
Well, we can get into the weeds. Yeah, you can pull out any scenario. Like if it happens overnight, it's absolutely the worst case scenario. If it happens over an extremely long time, it means very little. Like if it happened over 10,000 years, it doesn't mean a lot because it's very easy to displace.
But if it happens over, let's say that's 50, 60 years.
Well, it's significant, but
Say it's
again, it just
100
goes back
times
to
the geological rate, which is what we're looking at. 100 times faster.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't care to even try to argue on that because I'm not knowledgeable about the actual stats. Like I'm not the guy to argue with it. That's someone like Alex Epstein or someone like that. But it still goes back to the argument. Like, yeah, that's bad, but all this stuff provides positives to people. Lowers their cost of living, brings them resources, shelter, food. They can have families.
Refugees are bad.
Nate,
Sorry.
Again, you keep blaming fossil fuel industry. It's not the fossil fuel industry that does that. It's the people that use
there is ways we can
against
frame
other
this,
people.
and I will frame the questions. Okay, so I just want you to repeat what you're saying. So you're basically saying there is a net benefit. Yes, there is the
whole concept of negative externality that we're not pricing in. Like acknowledge it. That's fine. There's going to be flooding. There's going to be more stronger hurricanes, tornadoes. But I just assume the worst. Yes, it's going to be worse. But is that a reason to forcibly intervene and keep people from using fossil fuels today? Like force our coal plants down or tax all the people who are using fossil fuels? So
I have a more important question to put to you on that, because this is one of the ones I struggle with, especially people who are anti-regulation, anti-government, anti-central banks, is that even if I agree with you, and I'm kind of part to the point where I think we're not going to stop this as much as we want to. It's going to happen. The time frame is what will change. But I live in the UK, which is a rich, wealthy nation. You live in the US, rich, wealthy nation, and between us, Canada. Sorry,
same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. You're just nice Americans.
We're like Britain too.
Yeah, but like generally speaking, and we're all comfortable, middle class, maybe upper middle class. Like we can adapt easily. I can get on a plane, and I can buy a house in the Highlands of Scotland.
We're pensioners.
So not only like as an extension of the economic colonialism, which Alex Gladstein's talk about, there's kind of a form of, I don't want to say climate colonialism because it's not that, but it's like this disregard for poorer nations who we've abused for years. We did inflict territorial colonialism. We did go and enslave people, and now we've enforced economic colonialism so we can live these great rich lives, and we've impoverished their nations. Now we're going to, if there is a distinct change in climate, and we are going to see sea levels rise or an impact on poorer nations, what do we do about them? And that's where I really struggle, because when I saw the recent debates at COP26, while a lot of people were focused on, 40 private jets winning, yes, obviously that's shit and hypocritical. But I did also pay a lot of attention to the fact there were discussions about how we're going to redistribute money between nations. And whether you people agree or disagree with that. Yeah, that kind of wealth equality across nations, where the nations that have benefited from causing the climate change are at least trying to support those who have benefited less and suffered dire consequences. And it's a real important question, especially for libertarians. It's like, what do we do about this? Because I don't believe it will be done in a voluntary way. So I want to put that to you. Right,
and that's a great question. Wealth equality and energy equality are synonymous. Energy is wealth. If you have a abundance of energy anywhere you are, you're typically going to be in a good spot. We used Nigeria earlier. Nigeria is an oil-rich nation. They have a lot of flaring, so I'm well aware of that because I have a lot of Nigerians calling us, especially since I've been doing it so long, about Bitcoin mining off like flare gas. That's what we're known for. So rich and I know that Nigeria is. I think their economy has come a long way, even in the last little while, but. If you're going to suggest that any African nation is oppressed, which many are, to say that it's energy barons just doing it, well, I would say the barons that are doing it is true. It's not the fundamental technology that's causing it, though.
It's not the question I'm asking. What I'm asking is that we have the ability to adapt. I, as an individual, can buy a house high up on a hill, inland, and
we have to stop the inequality, what the source of the inequality is what we have to do, which is what all I do is tweet about that.
Okay, so how do you do that? The destruction of central banks?
You need sound money.
Yes. What if the rise in temperatures and the rising sea levels outpaces the speed at which we can get off a fiat system, and we are in a situation where these decisions are made by governments and central planners? Yeah, you said you are, in certain instances, pro-regulation, so you accept the need for some kind of centralizing force. What do you think we should do?
I think all we can do is promote the correct ideas. Like, the only effect I can have is to perpetuate the correct ideas. So that's why I'm a Bitcoiner. I think I see Bitcoin as an option to people. I suggest they consider it. I can't force anyone's hand. I don't want to force anyone's hand, but we had this beautiful Pacific Bitcoin conference, and you get a bunch of the best Bitcoiners in the world talking about how the technology is a freedom technology. So people, and actually, I think Nigerians are becoming known for being Bitcoiners. Is what I'm hearing, and that's what I want to see. But that's one option. That doesn't mean that's not the only path forward. I would like to see if it can be done through politics, which I'm skeptical of, because I'm just a skeptic of our system. I think it's deeply corrupt.
I agree.
But if it wasn't, and there really truly was a way to vote out central banking and more specifically unreserved fiat, money printing, signage, the sovereign printing money and debasing the currency, if we can get rid of that, I think that will be the first true fundamental step in getting what is currently a highly skewed wealth balance in the world from, well, the elites have it all, and the rich countries have it all, and the poor are just absolutely trampled on. That'll be the start, because Africa is a resource rich continent immensely. They should be a very rich. They should be very, call it, equal on the wealth spectrum, but they're not, and that's. I blame fiat. I just call the fiat maximalists. I blame fiat for that. I blame money printing for that. I blame the economics of violence, who many of your other guests could articulate much better than I have.
Yeah.
So I think I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I'm a Bitcoiner. I use it in my business. I create a circular economy with my customers, and I prefer the money. I think it's better. But that doesn't mean to say that it's for everyone in the world. It's, it has limitations. That's why I've also talked about, I would like to see even a return. I don't know if this is going to happen. I was arguing with people this week about it. I would like to see a return because I don't think the state is going to adopt Bitcoin, despite the hope that many Bitcoiners have. I don't see the governments adopting it, central banks adopting it. But you know what? Maybe Bitcoin, through its competitive, forcing them into competition to have a sounder money, because people are opting out of their money, and which eventually will hit a tipping point if it doesn't stop. Well, why don't they retreat to a gold standard, a precious metals standard? That would still be better than the state of the art today. And that would be a step in the right direction. So I'm hoping that in my lifetime, we see mass adoption of Bitcoin. It might not be as prolific as I hope to see it, but if they retreat, if that forces this, who I'll just loosely call the state, the fiat maxis, the authority that's creating wealth redistribution and inequality, that makes them retreat back to a sound money reserve, then I will feel like all of us and our message has done a lot of good for the world. And I think it will end up natively with better energy equality and better opportunity equality across the globe.
I think I like it. It sounds like a moonshot, a Hail Mary, and it's a hope that we make that transition.
Yeah.
But whilst there is that hope we make that transition, there are other actions that someone like Nate maybe would argue that we can do, to hedge this. So Nate,
we all agree on the central banking, but that doesn't solve the problem of, in Canada in particular, right? Canada has incredibly fertile soil, and a warming earth will make that farmable. And you guys are kind of like that pioneering species, laying the roads and the infrastructure to make that happen one day, possibly. And you have, in Canada and the US, the resources to do that. But nothing you just said addresses the 3.2 to 3.6 billion people in impoverished countries to handle. And you mentioned one thing earlier about, it does, we can adapt to slow rising seas, but it's not slow rising seas. We're talking about the major damage from hurricanes is not necessarily the wind, it's the storm surge. So a meter of sea level rise and then a giant storm surge on top of a king tide is going to destroy these people's entire livelihoods. What do we do with the 3.2 to 3.6 billion people who are going to start to be displaced by this? Their stuff is destroyed. They can't just pick up. They're moving with nothing. They have nothing, and it is not their fault because they live in energy poverty, right? So this is the negative externalities. We had access to crude, that sweet crude. We use this to build our resiliency while these people have been left in energy poverty. They aren't resilient. So where do they go? How do we handle these? We can't just say, oh, tough titties, you all have to die now, or you all go into the refugee camps the rest of your life. No, that is a moral, it's just morally abhorrent. As a human, it becomes our responsibility. Now we have to take them. Now you are forcing me to pay for these people, for your actions, for our actions.
Rather than ask Steve the questions, what is it you think that should be done?
Yeah.
I'm asking you. What do you think should be done?
We need, since we had the access to those easy hydrocarbons, right, for 150 years to develop. We can't let these people not develop. Again, that is not an option. They have to have that ability. And so since we've had that option, it is our responsibility to make the resources that they can use for resiliency to leapfrog this technology that's going to displace billions of people. It is our job to put the R&D into these resources to go get the manganese nodules. Peter, when are you getting your manganese nodule?
Mate, I was on eBay looking.
To go get these manganese nodules, to make these technologies affordable and available. And I do not believe that fossil fuels can do it in the first place. And if they, let's say magically they could, that would make them even more vulnerable to these same problems. And so I want to bring more energy. And it turns out that the OTEC thing that I'm working on happens to disproportionately, work in the developing world at the coast, at the equator, near the tropics, where 40% of humanity works.
You haven't really answered my question. What do you think we should do?
We have to subsidize the development of these resources, these resiliency technologies, these new distributed renewable energy technologies to the point that they can afford them, that they can.
But that's only the developing world. What, like the rest of the world?
So when you look at the models, right, what you see is that depending on where the emissions of the world are, you see a peak temperature and then a descent, right? So if we cut our emissions, yes, it will continue to get hotter for a little bit, but it'll come back down. That's what we have to do as fast as humanly possible through the proliferation of nuclear, hydro where it's available, whether that means building these resources in places we don't live, taxing the carbon for its negative externalities to help these people, because at the end of the day, it's our fault. It becomes, to quote Troy Cross, this is a tort issue. We are going to hurt them, and, at the end of the day, it's our fault, and we're kind of on the hook.
So you believe we need to transition to more renewables and nuclear
as much possible,
and quickly as possible.
Yes.
Can we talk about the subsidy aspect of that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm pitching that the centralized control of the government, the authorities are the cause and the root cause of wealth inequality and energy inequality. I've also said I believe if we had a free market, you would have the optimal balance of energy systems, whether it's renewable or whatnot. So you're suggesting that we use more of the centralizing control, which is the government. I'm just going to say loosely the government because they're tied in with the central banking and signage and wealth inequality. You're suggesting give them even more power than they currently have to fix the problem that they caused, is effectively the way I read what you're saying.
The problem that fossil fuels caused.
The problem that humans using.
So I guess that's where we disagree, because I'm saying that it's not fossil fuels. It's the authorities that are wielding it.
Let me ask you a question, Steve. Without any central authority and a free market for energy, do you think we would be using similar amounts of energy now, less or more? Is there any argument to say that without a central authority, we wouldn't see humans using and causing a change in climate change?
I would say that what's more important is not how much we're using, it's how much we're wasting. I would say we'd be wasting way less.
But do you think we would still be raising the temperature of the planet by human action because of what we're using?
We could very well be, yeah. I would say we'd still have a mix of all the fossil fuels. We'd have a mix of solar. We'd have a mix of wind and nuclear.
But the free market would decide which is the best energy. But the best energy might be the fact that it's fossil fuels.
The future I would see.
So sorry.
Yeah.
And I believe in I believe in a free market gives us a lot of efficiencies, but I also believe there can be greed in there, and there's a lack of incentive. Like, at least with the government, they create certain incentives. Whatever you think of the state. And people hate the police and the monopoly of violence they have, but the monopoly of violence is also something that allows people to realize, like, if I commit a crime, I go to jail. You know, there's certain actions that it prevents you from doing. So would we have had the rapid development of renewables over this last 10, 20 years without subsidies? Probably not. The subsidies
I would say it would happen a lot faster.
Without the subsidies, but didn't the subsidies make it cheaper, incentivize it?
Well, that's the premise on why they're doing the subsidies. But there's inventiveness, like people in every industry, not just energy, but like anything, even podcasting, whatever. Inventiveness are individuals that are effectively seeking our opportunity and arbitraging it. There's more, you can have more inventiveness among a group, among a population, if you have a wealthier population, if you have people with more time to tinker, right? The guy who has the money to spend on some of the tools he needs to, like a lathe or whatever he might need, to bring to his garage and tinker, right? That's my experience. I've done a few patents. I've done a few inventions. Patent doesn't mean it's inventive, but I've done a few things that the market liked. And that was my experience. I had the resources to do it. I didn't have any subsidies. It is true that subsidies can also spark inventiveness. Like, your project is expensive. It's almost impossible for you to achieve anything without help. Like, that's just a fact. When I started my company, it was a tiny project. Like, I was able to crack my piggy bank and get something done. I brought a guy in, but it wasn't a big project. There's different scales, and subsidies have their place, but they're not fundamental to inventiveness.
People who believe in a free market believe that we make rational economic decisions in a free market. Rational economic decisions might not always consider the externalities. So, for example, like I always bring up the DuPont example. They poison the waters. Because as a rational economic actor, you might not give a fuck about downstream and poisoning waters. And so, as a rational economic actor, without subsidies, you might not have seen the rapid expansion of renewables. Outside of anyone who's listening saying, well, this doesn't work, well, look at you. I'm just saying that has been something that has supported the expansion.
Yeah, it's been very well funded, yes.
So the point I'm trying to get to is that even with a free market, we still might be facing an existential issue with rising temperatures.
We might be, yeah. I do believe that if we had a free market, we would have less waste. We'd have more inventiveness. We'd be further along on the renewables tech, like solar, wind, OTEC, because we'd have a better wealth distribution. We'd have more people with time to arbitrage the opportunities that they find.
We could be more productive and therefore less waste, but use up more energy.
Yeah, because a
we're more
subsidy, you
productive.
got to remember, a subsidy a subsidy doesn't come out of thin air. It's wealth stripped from a different group. So by subsidizing one thing, you're taxing something else, and
We're also printing money out of thin air.
but that's subsidy through signage. That's the debasement of everybody's money. And that's really where most of the subsidies are coming, because they're coming from deficit spending. Not all of them, because you have carbon tax, which is the direct source of subsidy for clean tech projects, say in Canada. A lot of the startups that get investors and go after a really difficult problem, they do get subsidies. I'm not opposed to that. Well, I am opposed to it in the sense that I don't think it's right to strip the wealth from everyone else in order for the government to decide where it goes. I think there's a better way on a free market, which would be all privately funded. I mean, if we had a true free market and better wealth, it really comes down to wealth distribution. If we didn't have this huge wealth inequality problem, we would have more inventiveness. I think batteries would be further along. I think.
Can I push back a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
By the way, Stefan Livera, I put that point to him recently, and he said he believes in a true free market will have higher wealth inequality, but the poorest in society would actually be richer. They would have a higher standard of living, but we'd have higher wealth inequality.
I would agree with the latter. I wouldn't. Well, I mean, he's more of an economist than I am, but yeah.
So my pushback is in that you're saying that in a true libertarian free market, we would have a greater rate of innovation. Is that?
We can say with better wealth distribution, we would, because we'd have more people with money to tinker and try things, more or less.
Free market iterates. All major innovation have been done through government grant and research. Nuclear, rockets, fiber optics.
Some of that came from aliens.
Some of that did come from aliens. Yes,
Yeah.
the fiber optic cables
You
came from
can't
the
say
aliens.
that
Yeah.
with certainty because you don't know what the alternative would have been.
Because real innovation comes from probing the edges, places where there is no value, immediate value to anyone, right? Things like looking at the fundamental chemistry of nuclear physics, right? Things that don't have immediate value. Mathematics that has no basis in reality, probabilistic theory, irrational numbers. And then we find them in places, well, you can't make quantum physics work without irrational numbers.
So you're suggesting that the government knows best and is telling people where the best opportunities
I think what he's
lie.
saying is that some innovations come from the government. I've read about this before as well.
Who is the guy who said that, Michael? That we were listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I've heard a podcast where it's like the government, where there isn't a rational economic decision, will invest in certain technologies or innovations. I think you can make.
No,
both
he's
arguments.
right. He's right in the sense that government can also innovate. It has all those major things you said.
No, researchers who are probing the edges of reality where there is no economic incentive to do so. The just crazy research that no one funds because there is no economic value. That's where innovation happens. Innovation doesn't happen by putting a new form factor on a computer and invent, a phone, right? That is an iteration of technologies that already exist, that were subsidized by government grants and research. I mean, all the major electricity itself, the fossil fuel exploration. How do we know where fossil fuels are in the continental U.S.? It was the U.S. Geological Survey. We wouldn't know where they were. This was the.
I think on that one there's a possibility these rational economic actors would have found a reason to do that.
Fair.
But there are arguments that, there are things. I think there are better arguments. One of them is, for example, if we're going to face bigger storms, you're most like, and you want to protect yourself from storms or hurricanes. Actually, it is the centralized. It's the centralized study of weather patterns, which is most likely to be a better scenario handled by the government to allow people to, like the US is great at preparing for storms because they know they're coming and people can leave. And if you make that a capitalist idea, then you have to charge people for access to that data, and some people might not be able to avoid the storms. So I think you can make the argument for that.
Sea surface
but I also think you can make the argument for both.
Program.
I don't think it's black or white.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I don't think there's black or white.
What that is doing
would
You
never
made the point,
be.
Nate. You made the point.
Geo cruises would never be funded
I understand.
by a free market. The government from human beings, when no doubt the current iteration of the government is corrupt, but our government should be of
The people
by
for the
and
people.
for the people. And just because that's not how it works now doesn't mean, and I think what Bitcoin does is it strips the corruption from the government. It makes it impossible to embezzle or bribe because it's open and it's public. It makes the government better. It makes bureaucracy.
I think that's what you'll agree on. Let Steve finish it.
We can argue about it. I think if you objectively strip search the U.S. patent database and could figure out exactly how each inventor was funded, you would find the vast majority of inventors. Governments do patents too, unless they're top secret. They are not government funded. The vast majority
grant
of them.
money at the bottom of every single thing.
Right.
Guys.
At the end of the day, you can talk about money. What we're really talking about is time to produce something. There are some projects that are immense. Like I compared when I started Upstream Data, my little project versus what you have. It's very big, different scale. You're discounting the fact that human beings can pool resources together. Say in a different universe, we have better wealth distribution, and you're like, hey, OTEC is sick, everybody. Let's get after this. You could still, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that by pooling resources of people interested in your project, seeking a profit motive, which is always the root of all motives, a profit-seeking motive, to join you in your effort to help fund you and help you succeed. And you could even say me as a supplier after meeting you, you telling me about your
in the Large Hadron Collider.
Knowledge is the profit. Knowledge drives
yeah,
new.
but I can't sell. Come on.
Knowledge drives new technology.
You wouldn't get the Large Hadron Collider without.
You wouldn't get an international space station.
There
you
are
wouldn't
many
get satellite technology. You wouldn't get fiber optic communication because these things took hundreds of separate research grants and thousands of individuals who had no economic value until there was a cacophony of these scientific voices all melding together, and out plops the internet. Out plops satellites.
You're talking about a grouping of individuals who have the
That-
time to do something,
Because
which
they
can be
had
driven by
grant
pooling of a free market group of people who want to profit from it.
I think the point that Nate's trying to make is that there's either no immediate profit or there's no future profit of some of these things.
That's called risk. There's risk management.
But do you not think he makes a good point with regards to rational economic actors iterate. They don't innovate. In that, how can you, like, for example, I think...
Well, how do you distinguish them? I mean, if you're doing something... You can almost look at every invention as just making the use of energy more efficient. Like we're extracting our resources more efficiently. Every little knick-knack does something to help.
Action at a distance is not making energy more efficient. Quantum entanglement. If there hadn't been 100 years of disagreement between the greatest physicists, we wouldn't even be talking about quantum computers.
Okay, let me put that one back to you. How do you know in a true free market that you wouldn't have had education, free market education, private education, where that research would have happened where physicists would have disagreed?
It was called the Dark Ages.
No, but how do you know
We lived in a perfect
Are you saying-
libertarian society
No.
run by.
Nate, you're not answering the question. Okay. The point being is, if that we did live in a libertarian society with pure free market, we would have education facilities. We would have places where people go and are educated, and you would have experts who would be teachers, and they would also be physicists and debating. How do you know that wouldn't happen?
Somalia. Sorry, that's a cheeky ass answer.
Yeah, and that's one I use
I
to
know.
be pedantic with people as well.
I'm
But
being
Somalia
definitely-
isn't actually a libertarian society; it's just a failed state.
Well, there was no research. It's called the Dark Ages, and there was no good research, and there was no education, and all the money went to those people who had the fiefdoms, who owned the land. That was a pure, what's it called? The society where you have the castle, and then the guy owns the land.
Feudalism.
Feudalism is libertarianism, and there was no education. There was no research.
Let's go back to my original point, is that even in a scenario with a pure free market where everyone has access to good energy, we still may face the scenario whereby we would have an increase in temperatures, which would have that existential threat. What do we do in that scenario? What happens in that scenario? Because rational economic actors will usually think short term, right?
Individuals in any society are just seeking to provide for their family.
Yeah.
Like, have a family. We're mammals. We're life. We want to have offspring. Generally, doesn't seem to be the case everywhere today, but with people, a lot of people I've met actually don't want to have kids they're worried about the future, which I find extremely depressing.
Yes.
As a man who has a kid, as a child.
We're all fathers here.
So I don't know. We're sort of like projecting into an unknown future. So what the question is what? Like,
Well, should we be doing anything? What do you believe? Like
we're really just trying to provide for ourselves, self-interest,
Yeah.
and families, and of course our communities. Call that government, call that our neighbors. But that's what we're really trying to do. Like, any negative externality, if I get ahead by doing one thing that has more emissions than the other, I mean, is the argument that I'm just not allowed to do that, or I have to pay a negative externality? What about all the positives that's doing by enabling me to do more with my time? Because it really comes down to that. I don't have to scrap around as much for energy to fund my group.
It could be a positive local benefit to you, which has a negative local effect to somebody in another part of the world.
But you can have positive secondary effects as well. I mean, why isn't that possible?
Oh, it is, but it just
really comes to like, is it a
that
neg?
way.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's a tort issue.
yeah. I mean, like, are we just suggesting
Pakistanis
no
be
fossil
able to
fuels?
sue us?
I don't think an authority
Should the Marshall Islands, these small low-lying island communities, should they be able to sue us for 150
If you're
years of
damaging
pollution?
some other community, you should expect retaliation. I mean, you can call it lawsuit. In the end, it's violence. It's the government coming and intervening. So should one community retaliate against another that is affecting them
If I
negatively?
come in
Yes.
and I poison your land,
I'm going to come after you.
you're going to come after me?
Yes.
Through the government.
Well, in this society, yes. Or if they fail me
So
through
in a
other
free
means.
market society, though, you would have to fight me with a
love
gun.
I mean, you know what I mean.
You
Like,
have to come.
you see it all the time where the justice system fails, you know,
If I
and
come
people take
dump,
matters and you know what I mean. So
yeah,
like
in the
it's,
UK, we will hit you with a spoon.
yes. Yeah, through
Right
other
on the-
means.
right on the head.
Through other means. Yeah, I mean, I
should we? Is it our responsibility?
so I mean, like me the coal miner that
If-
makes your
let's
life
say-
better in every way.
If
Like,
if
am
our
I? And what do I
emissions
get out of it?
If our emissions cause the glaciers to melt, cause the sea to expand, cause the freshwater lens in these small, low-lying island nations to disappear, and they can no longer live, are we responsible? And what should be done? What should be done to remedy that?
That's a lot of questions. Let him answer.
Should the government step in? If I harm you, I would expect consequences. I mean,
But Steve,
I just don't see
how do
why-
you realistically measure that? How do you realistically measure that
Yeah,
you
so the
in Canada have affected, whoever in the Marshall Islands? You can't make that connection between two people. You have to aggregate them. And you can
aggregate them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what solution are you suggesting? Like, what
How about
possibility?
some accounting scheme?
An accounting scheme where we enrich
Just I'm
the
being
authority.
cheeky. I apologize.
I just
I
don't.
think this
The
is
thing
why
is,
some
like,
people-
if I knew a solution to never have any change in the climate, from whether it's warmer or cooler, I'd love to discuss that. I don't have one.
There's this nice set of
And if you look
coupled model intercomparison projects.
I just don't understand what the problem is. If you even look historically over a long time frame, things change. They do change. Yeah, we have now an effect on it as well. But what are we suggesting we do? Like, just what happens if we have an authority say no more of this nasty stuff that's causing these negative externalities? Like,
I think this is why some people like the idea of a carbon tax, because I know it would be completely inefficient, full of weird incentives.
misallocates capital.
It misallocates capital, but it at least provides a function to redistribute from those who have caused more damage to those who've caused less.
You're really just arguing for a carbon tax is harming people.
I'm not arguing for anything. I'm
No, I know, but like
why people consider it.
If Nate's suggesting either carbon tax or any forced state authority to reallocate resources, so no coal for you, and you got to go to solar.
But you just
what
said
you're doing
you would
is
sue
forcibly.
me if I dumped
No, I'm saying
poison
that
on your land.
You're forcing.
And you would use the power of the state and the violence of the state to come after me for doing something to you. But now in the case where we, as a global society, are dumping poison onto someone else's land.
But we're not talking about poison.
I think, Steve, I don't think you've given us a strong, on a personal perspective, I don't think you've given a strong answer for fairness in the system. In a global system where it's one climate, really, and the wealthier nations have benefited from the fossil fuels.
But we are talking about a future, like a scenario where wealth is equal. And in this scenario,
I'm talking about right now, we are already seeing impacts of climate change on whether it's the example we've talked about before, because we've researched it, is coffee producers in Ethiopia.
We've acknowledged that the current state is terrible of wealth inequality and energy inequality.
But what is the balancing function if you aren't able to get rid of central banks and solve that problem, which I don't,
No, what I'm asking is, in the ideal world, okay, what is the ideal future here? Like, where wealth is more equalized, energy opportunity is more equalized. Are you suggesting that nobody's having carbon emissions, or we all have equal carbon emissions?
No. What is the balancing function for the impact of climate change between wealthier and developing nations?
No, I'm trying to say that in this idealistic future that you have clearly in your head, I assume.
No,
you don't.
Just that question I've asked you. What's the balancing function? If the answer there is none,
I would say I don't think there's anything we can do. If you're going to use energy, you're going to emit carbon. The lowest base load you can have in the economy, which is everything, is not using any energy whatsoever. Your metabolic rate is about 80 watts. That's your lowest impact. That's your lowest pollution level. Like your negative, that's just the breath coming out of your mouth. That's you hunting and gathering and eating. That's the lowest possible. That's just we're basically a light bulb running our body, right? So that's the lowest we can be. So what are we striving for? Are we just like striving to get there?
Well, no, for example,
there's always going to be a level of carbon emissions that we're leveraging technology
of course,
to do.
But like the US population, the US is, I think, 13% of global emissions, and 350 million out of 8 billion. What's that about? 3% of the world population? I don't know. I'm just throwing a number out. But what I'm saying
Higher
is,
energy usage, higher emissions per capita is what you're saying.
So they've got the high benefit, they've got the wealth and resource to mitigate and adapt. What is the balancing function for nations who don't have that? And if the answer there is none, that's fine. That's an answer. I just wondering
I
what
thought
your
we
answer is.
established that my opinion was the balancing function is to create the equality where we can say the energy and emissions per capita is equal, right? That's what we're talking about. Because if you're saying Americans have more emissions per capita than other nations, which I think is true. Okay, so how do we equalize it? First of all, like how do we equalize it? I already answered that, which was.
But does that actually equalize it, or does that equalize the opportunity?
I don't think you can disentangle wealth equality and energy equality. Like how much you're emitting really is a function of how much you're spending, right?
Yeah, but there's a chronological consideration here that some nations are further ahead in terms of innovation, development, wealth accumulation. And even if you had energy equality, these developing nations are just behind.
I'm having trouble with the question because like there is an emissions level per capita that's not equally distributed. I'm saying that if wealth was equally distributed, which implies energy is equally distributed, you would have relatively equal distribution of emissions, which seems to be our problem here. Like we're saying that emissions are the bad thing.
Not necessarily, because you might proportion per capita have equal distribution, but like if you look at something like a small island, their total contribution might be tiny and they still might suffer vastly different consequences than a larger nation.
Yeah, I mean, there's the current state of things. Emissions are really sort of, you can say they're tied to your spending. If you're spending a lot of money, you're actually generating a lot of production amongst society, right? You're buying burgers, you're buying houses, and people have to go build that and consume resources and make emissions. So it's really a function of spending. And if you have a wealth equality across the globe, and I'll say it on a per capita basis, then you should have a relatively equal emissions cost.
The consequences might be different due to the geography of the nation you live in.
Yeah, there are differences. I'm just saying in this ideal scenario where everything's equal. And here's what I'm trying to get at. When you're trying to solve a problem, right? Like in engineering, I'm going to keep going back to that. What is the future we're trying to make? Like, okay, you have a problem at a plant and you need to fix it. Well, what does the state look like, and how do you build to get there? So what are we establishing here? What is the state that we're trying to get in the future? I would say it's wealth equality. And then that's energy consumption equality, that's emissions equality, how much you pollute. I think we've agreed that you cannot get rid of emissions. There's going to be something at any future state you can think of. So what's important is how do you get equality in all this? And what's the function to get there? I already answered that, which was crush central banking, crush seigniorage. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, can you, in that future state where we have wealth equality, is there something we can do to kill emissions altogether? There are some things we can do. You can have nuclear baseload completely replace coal everywhere. As long as we have the resources.
We're all going to agree on, aren't we?
Which I also would like, even though I self-advertise as a coal maximalist. It's more to be provocative and to get these ideas discussed. But if you can replace baseload with nuclear, which has low emissions, that's amazing. Like, I hope we get there.
Needs a lot of water.
Yeah, you'll still have, and that might reduce all the emissions of coal baseload for power generation, but then you'll have some coal usage and other manufacturing and all the like. So yeah, we can talk about that. That's a possibility that we can, on a per capita basis, for a given energy level, an energy baseload per person, you could have a lower emissions level, and there's technologies to do that.
Your wealth and your power usage destroys someone else's wealth and someone else's power usage. Look at, Canada has 20-30% of the world's freshwater resources, some crazy number Canada has. And our developed world, the developed world, our use of energy is destroying the water resources of these much poorer nations. How do you distribute that geographic wealth? Water is wealth, not energy. Water.
That's why I agree.
Water is everything. So
there's a need for regulation.
Do do we take these refugees into our homes, into our house? China built these ghost towns, so they're ready. They're ready to accept these people, all of Southeast Asia, as the sea levels rise, as it gets hotter, as their crops collapse, as the water either become, the monsoons become, destroy their rice crops, destroy their food livelihood. China can absorb that. You look at the distribution of land on planet Earth, it's all in the northern hemisphere. Not all of it. That means that they're going to come north. All the water is in Russia and Canada. All the good soil is in Russia and Canada.
Come and live with you, Steve.
You guys should come to Canada. It's a great place.
We've
and
got
maybe
a plan.
if you
We're
can
planning
bring,
it. We're
I'm
coming.
a dual citizen.
if you can bring good ideas, we can fix the government.
I bring
maybe.
good whiskey.
Do we accept the 3.2 to 3.6 billion people with arms wide open, or do we build the wall, which I always say is the second best climate change plan out there in the U.S. government, is to build a wall to keep these people out? What do we do with these people as they become starved of their wealth, as their houses are destroyed? What is wealth?
I would say we empower them where they reside, which is.
But what if it becomes not possible to live there? What if their cultures are destroyed and they're scattered
He's asking you, what's the
globe?
plan B?
Plan B, as in if we can't crush central banking and get on the right path.
Yeah.
I do think that's the struggle we face now. I've been talking online that we're entering the difficult phase of Bitcoin adoption, where heavy regulation is coming in and is going to create problems for us that will make it more difficult to get normal adoption the way we were hoping. What is plan B? I don't know how to answer the question. I think there's a state where wealth is equally distributed. How do we get there? I think it's through
water
killing
is
the root-
wealth, and
killing
you
the
can't
root problem.
redistribute that. And
Yeah,
we're
but you're
changing
talking
the way
about-
that water is distributed right now.
There is circumstantial problems that I can't solve, that the government can't solve, as far as I'm concerned. But a free market can at least try to redistribute themselves.
Free market concentrates wealth.
If we empower people in a nation that's being strip mined from fiat maximalists and empower those people, maybe it's Bitcoin, I hope it's Bitcoin, that they empower themselves through us as a group on a network, on a distributed network.
Food.
No, but it generates, it hopefully preserves wealth. And if
Bitcoin doesn't make it rain. Sorry.
What I'm saying is the circumstantial disadvantages that everyone has, and you never get rid of that completely. At least if they're empowered through wealth equalization, they can make their own way at that point in time. They can get out of the problems they're in. A lot of these people are in problems because they were put there through fiat maximalism, through signers, through all this stuff that's been talked about on the show a trillion times over. I'm saying if we can keep empowering those people, they'll get themselves out of the situation. I don't think the government needs to intervene. I think we disagree on a lot of what the government's role is and what it can do versus a free market. The innovation thing is a strong disagreement, but that to me is how it is. That's like step one.
Can you name one innovation?
I have a pump that I designed.
No. But that's an iteration. Name a true one, just one. Give me one example.
Well,
Tax.
you're going to have to define
tax.
That was being ironic.
You have to define what is the difference between I'm
going to make a point here. Look, we've hit a point where I think we've hit an impasse where we're not making progress.
I think that's true. Yeah,
and I think what we should do is we should end. We have a little conclusion. We should end and then come back to this at another point. But I tried my best to moderate fairly, and I think we're getting to a point where now we're not making progress. We're coming down to small little arguments. So let's conclude. Let's rethink, reevaluate, discuss again offline, and then maybe come back and do it again. Who do I give the opening to? Did I give it to you?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the close. Just like a couple of minutes. What do you want to say? Where do you want to close? What do you want? Have you learned anything from today? Is there anything you've got out of it that's changed your opinion? Is there anything you'd want Steve to think about when he leaves?
I look at it from the humanitarian view. Water is wealth, and we are stealing the wealth of the world. We have it hoarded. We have hoarded the wealth of the world in the developed world for the last 150 years and left billions of people starved of energy and prosperity. And now we're saying, tough titties. We're going to keep doing our thing. To hell with the consequences. You'll adapt. You'll adapt. That is an anti-human view at its core. And I believe it is our mission. It is our responsibility. It's a tort issue to do whatever we can in our ability to use that wealth that we've accumulated through 150 years of economic colonialism, through straight up colonialism. We've stolen the human capital of the developing world to build our society. We wouldn't have America as a global superpower if we didn't steal the literal people. Then we stole the wealth. And now we're stealing the water, the food, the livelihoods, their capital. And I haven't heard a plan outside of magically destroying central bank, which we all agree on. But that's not a plan for the 3.2 to 3.6 billion human beings who will be material, whose wealth, the little that they have, will be destroyed by our direct actions. And at some point, we have to do, whether that be subsidies, whether that be taxes, because we can afford it, and it's going to suck. But we have to do everything we can because we can't just let these people die. We can't let these people starve. We can't let these people... And I want to do whatever I can. And what I came up with the best plan that I could possibly do, and that's to bring them as much energy as possible in as least damaging a way, because if you have unlimited energy, you can solve unlimited problems.
It's Steve. Same to you. Any conclusion you want? Any kind of closing points? And anything you've changed your opinion on, or anything you got out of this?
I don't think I've changed my opinion. I understand thinking defeating central banking is difficult. I feel like I've already done that in my own personal sphere. I can't. At least the Bitcoin holdings I have can't be debased. It's been good for me. It's been good for my business. It's helped us continue to innovate in the market without subsidies, although we've taken a little. So it's not, there's always a gray area. But Bitcoin's helped my business. Everyone listening, if I'm presuming most are cryptocurrency people, aside from some temporary, pain, cryptocurrency has been a net benefit to most. And yeah, I do think that we are really, and if you listen to me online, I'm always looking high level at the real battle, which is fiat versus Bitcoin. I don't care about the other stuff, the distractions. That's why I'm not interested in crypto generally, broadly. I'm interested in Bitcoin, proof of work technology. And so, yeah, my opinion is just simply, it's not my place to just, pay the government to go help some guy in Timbuktu. I'm going to go help everyone in my immediate community, my suppliers, my people I trade with, my business partners, my family, all this stuff. And I'm going to use Bitcoin as a tool to get there. And I think that as that catches on, as you do it and the network grows, it's the compounding effect will eventually be impossible to reverse. It'll very quickly, the whole gradually then suddenly thing. So, bring it back to Bitcoin, baby. I mean, that's how I'll end.
All right. Listen, I appreciate you both. I got a lot out of this. I still need to develop myself
Are
as a
you
moderator.
are you a fossil fuel maximalist yet? Maybe not.
No,
I don't get that. I got you. I don't get that. I got you
I
quite
generally
there.
walk down the middle and see it all, and I wrestle with it all. I wrestle with the implication or the impact on people who've been nothing but essentially abused by wealthier nations, and I see that. I also see the fact that we need fossil fuels. I just see it all. Most of all, I will reflect on what I did as a moderator and take Danny's feedback about where I was injecting too much opinion, not enough moderating. We're all here to learn. Appreciate you both. Love you both. Let's go.
Slanjava.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.